And showtime. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the ChannelPro 5-Minute Roundup. A look at news, trends, and tips for the SMB channel in 5 minutes or thereabouts. I am one of your hosts, Rich Freeman, Executive Editor of the ChannelPro Network. With me, as always, is my co-host, Erick Simpson, who is Senior Vice President and CIO of SPC International, a business improvement and training organization for MSPs and other IT providers. Erick, you're supposed to be on vacation this week.
Yeah, I know, but I figured, I could break away for to keep our, our streak going, Rich. We haven't missed one yet, so far be it from me to be the one that breaks that chain.
Well, I appreciate your taking 5 minutes or thereabouts out of your break. So let's plunge into the news here, and a number of interesting stories this week. But the one that I wanted to highlight was a big product launch from SonicWall. Which is interesting in a couple of different ways. So first and foremost, this is a move on their part upmarket into what they call the mid-tier enterprise, which to them means businesses with 500 to 2,500 seats, basically. So this is going beyond their traditional SMB base. They are still 100% channel, although they're going to have some sales enablement and technical sales resources available to people who want to go after those larger accounts. There are some hardware components to this product wave, some new switches that they're introducing that are designed to have the scalability that bigger customers need. And some of those products may or may not be relevant to a lot of truly SMB-oriented channel pros. But there's a lot of stuff that they were doing here as well that actually will be relevant to anyone who works with SonicWall. So they're turning their security center, let me get the name right here, the security capture security center application is now going to be sort of a centralized dashboard for all of the different security hardware and software tools you get from SonicWall. They've introduced a new tool called the Cloud App Security product. The name is modeled after a cloud application security broker kind of system. They dance around this a little bit. It isn't a true CASB system, as people say, but it has a lot of the functionality of a CASB system and is sort of a down payment on one. It sounds like planning to do something full-scale CASB later on down the road. They have integrated their Capture Client solution, the endpoint protection solution they introduced just a few months ago, with their Capture ATP sandbox service. So if Capture Client now spots something that gets sort of a moderate risk score, it will automatically send it into the sandbox for testing. So a number of different things that they announced this week that from their perspective are significant because they enable SonicWall to compete in the mid-tier enterprise space, but are actually going to be relevant to anyone who partners with SonicWall.
And the thing that I'm most excited about, Rich, is this channel only posture that they've got. All too often we see these big manufacturers or vendors that have these enterprise level solutions, but then are selling direct as well, especially for government RFPs and things like that. It's really hard to compete at that level. So it was really encouraging to me to hear the SonicWall folks now saying, look, we're going to release these things, but we're going to help enable you and partner with you as our partner to go sell into the mid and enterprise with these enterprise class deliverables. So that is good news for channel partners.
And I got it straight from the CEO. He was emphatic about it. And he said, that to the extent that they are going to have any, as he put it, direct touch resources at all for the end user, it's really coming in response to feedback from the partners who said that in order to sell at that level, a lot of the times the customer wants somebody from the vendor in the room. Mm-hmm. So they're, meeting the demand of the end user, meeting the demand of the partner, but that's really all they're doing. They will be 100% channel and remain so.
Yeah, that's great news. And, again, when partners are out there, determining, the vendor and the manufacturer that they're going to partner with, that's going to make a difference in their decision-making process.
So we're talking about sales, and if I remember right, your tip of the week has something to do with sales.
It does. So this week's tip of the week is all about the importance of building a strong process for selling as a team between a sales professional and an engineer or sales engineer. Now, Rich, as you know, many IT providers, when they're emerging or early on in building their organizations, it's really hard to justify having a dedicated sales engineer on the team that we can just rely on to go on sales calls and do our proposals and job walks and all that stuff. Because they're one of the most costly resources in the organization, along with a project manager, because we don't really receive ROI from a dedicated sales engineer or dedicated project manager until we sell an opportunity. Then we can recoup our costs that way. So as a result, a lot of the organizations or a lot of IT provider organizations have folks wearing different hats. So we'll grab a billable engineer to come along as the quote unquote sales engineer for that particular engagement or opportunity. And when we have sales professionals that are new on the team or have just built a reliance on an engineering resource to come on early sales calls because they haven't really developed that qualifying process yet, or the understanding of how to properly qualify for each solution in a provider solution stack, they tend to lean on the engineering resources as a crutch. Heck, I would too, right? Help me close this opportunity. But again, when we're doing that, what are those engineers not doing at the same time? Billing. So there's a challenge there. So today's tip is all about building a process and a cadence around selling as a team. So the first thing that I'll say is train your sales professionals on every single solution in your stack so they understand how to qualify for every single one of those solutions, the feature and benefits and the qualifying questions. And this helps you grow sales overall, because typically sales professionals get really good at selling just one or two or three things. And because they haven't had the experience or the training or the exposure to these other solutions, they kind of fall back to those as their primary go-to solution. So when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So let's train our sales professionals across the breadth of our solution stack. And then when they're actually able to qualify for each of these solutions more effectively, they'll have less reliance on an engineering resource early on in the sales engagement. So now we'll bring on an engineering or sales engineer on when we've qualified the prospect properly. We now see, yes, there's an opportunity here, there's budget, now help me with the scoping of the solution. And I guess my final point on this quick tip is, when you're meeting with a client together as a sales professional and sales engineer, the sales professional runs point on the appointment, on the meeting. All too often we bring engineers in and, the engineer has to justify while they're there. So they start talking about everything and they take control of the discussion. But guess what? The engineers have had thousands of hours of engineering training, right? They probably have very few hours of sales training. That's where the sales professional has to maintain the focus of the engagement. They're running the appointment. They are running that meeting, and they're transferring questions from the client to the sales engineer, getting the sales engineer to answer that question. The engineer then politely closes his mouth and smiles, and the sales professional continues the sales conversation. It's incumbent upon them to close the sale. So you have to build a cadence and a rhythm of how you conduct those meetings so that the sales professional is in control. The engineer is there to support the sales process. That is the one and only job of a sales engineer or an engineer conducting the sales engineer function. They are there simply to help the sales process along. So if you're an engineer and feel like you're talking too much, you probably are. And think about what you're saying and when you're saying it, and analyze it from the perspective of, will this help move the sales process along, or will it hinder it? Tip of the week.
So interesting. It's a mix of cross-training and getting people to understand how to stay in their swim lane, essentially. So on the one hand, you need for the salespeople to know enough of the technical information to qualify prospects,
right?
But also to know how to hand questions off to the people who really know how to answer the technical questions. And conversely, you need the technical people to know enough about the sales process to know when they should be talking and when they shouldn't. So yeah, teamwork is very much what that's about.
And it takes a lot of role playing. So role play, role play, role play with your sales professional and your engineering team. If you don't have a dedicated sales, even when you have a sales engineer, because really the sales engineer is the one that's going to, I like to say, keep the sales professional honest. So in the drive back to the office, the engineer is giving the sales professional feedback. Okay, next time you want to say it this way. Don't actually say that. And also, I think one big point is sometimes the engineers got to correct the sales professional because we're setting the incorrect expectation with the prospect or client. And I don't recommend kicking them under the table or elbowing them, right? I recommend having a signal that the sales professional is watching for when the engineer needs to say something. And I say we need to, it's a corrective technique, but what we want to do is add something to the conversation to clarify what has just transpired. So what I used to use is simply a pen. As a sales engineer, I have my pen and pad out, and my sales professionals connecting the conversation, and they say something that I've got to just correct right now because no, we can't retest satellites on Wednesday when the weather's clear, right? So what I do is I put my pen down on the table, and my sales professional is watching for that. And when they see the pen go on the table, then they say something like this: "Is there anything you'd like to add, Eric?" And then I pick my pen up and I say, well, I would like to clarify one or two things. Again, clarifying, not throwing my sales professional under the bus, but practice that and role play to make it smooth. And it'll serve you well in the sales process when you're selling as a team.
That's great. That is a great tip there. A bit of stagecraft that can help out. Well, we have got time for just one more story here, and it involves two words that I never wish to see in the same sentence: beer and rationing. Ladies and gentlemen, right in the midst of World Cup mania in Europe right now, beer rationing is in effect. And it's due to supposedly, unless you're a conspiratorial sort, random set of circumstances where a lot of the CO2 makers in Europe are either upgrading their facilities or are down for maintenance issues or whatever. There's this giant CO2 shortage in Europe right now, and as a result, there's a bit of a beer shortage right in the middle of the World Cup. And certain brands are being rationed or are becoming unavailable. This is happening at the wholesale level. Retailers are limited to X cases a day. Just terrible, terrible timing all around for both the makers of beer and the drinkers of beer.
Yeah, it's really a shame, and I strongly suspect that there will be some legislation put in place to kind of have an oversight. I mean, how do you have every CO2 manufacturer that is critical to the beer making process, and CO2 is used in food grade CO2 is used in a lot of other products as well. How do you allow them to just go into maintenance mode all at the same time? I mean, it is a little odd, as you input into it, Rich. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after this.
Hearings. We need hearings. We need commissions. Yes.
We will not stand for this. This ration.
Absolutely not. No. Well, that is all the time we've got this week on the 5-Minute Roundup. Thank you very much for joining us once again. If you would like to join us in the future, I encourage you to subscribe to the ChannelPro Network channel on YouTube. That will keep you up to date on all of our upcoming episodes. You can take a look at all of our past ones as well. If you want more news about companies like SonicWall and other issues going on in the SMB channel, I encourage you to visit ChannelProNetwork.com on a regular basis. We've got great new stuff going up there every day. If you would like to learn more about SPC International and all the terrific work that Erick does with his clients, you'll want to go to consulting.spc-intl.com. That's consulting.spc-intl.com. So we will be back next week with another episode of the 5-Minute Roundup for you. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week. Erick and I are enjoying the rest of your week already.